statistics, something like 90% of parents give up the whole idea of feeding their child anything green by the age of 10. We know how hard it is to change the diet. Very often these children are very bright and they do know that they need the nutrition, but they have the fear and they can't. And therefore these kids are often running low in iron, and that can really dysregulate them as well. These kids are well fed in terms of calories, but within 45 minutes their brain's going, oh, I've got nothing to fuel me. Something missing here.
Yeah.
What we tend to do is to have a conversation with them and say,
Today's guest is Lucinda Miller, author of Brain Food Brilliance and founder of NatureDoc Kids. She works closely with families to support children's learning, behaviour and emotional well-being through nutrition, with a special focus on neurodiverse brain types. Lucinda, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. I would love for you to start by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and your story and how you came to specialising in nutrition for neurodiverse children.
Well, I've been practicing nutrition for about 30 years, and I came into it because I was in a state of chronic fatigue. I was able to function. It wasn't like I was wrapped up in bed all day, but I was exhausted all the time. And I found that, when I spoke to the doctor, they said it's nothing medical, we can't do much. And therefore I had to turn to something. And it happened to be nutrition. And my energy levels were transformed within about 10 days.
Wow.
But what I hadn't realised at the time was a lot of this drilled down to the fact that I have ADHD. That was discovered. So I first got into nutrition age 25, and then I got diagnosed when I was 31. So I sort of had 6 years of getting my energy levels back on track and so forth. But my brain was still a bit funky. And I didn't think much of it at the time. I just assumed that's the way I was wired, and it is the way I'm wired. But when I got the diagnosis, it all made a lot of sense. And now we know that if you're neurodivergent, which is a relatively new term for this sort of umbrella of all of these different types of brains, that is actually really exhausting. Having our types of brains, they go very fast. They can glitch sometimes, and therefore that was partly, I think, what contributed to it, because it was always in a sort of academic environment, at school, university, when I had to concentrate for long periods of time, I just couldn't, and I found it exhausting. So I think then I got really interested in the whole aspect of brain health and how to support that and to get more mental clarity, more mental stamina, as well as that sort of physical side of things. And then, fascinatingly enough, my husband also has a diagnosis.
Really?
He, in fact, was diagnosed just before me. And that's actually what prompted me to seek it out, the diagnosis, because we had these conversations. I thought, that just sounds so like me.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah. So he'd be diagnosed. And then we have 3 kids, and 2 have now been diagnosed with ADHD and 1 also with dyspraxia.
Yeah.
And actually looking wider in the family, there's lots of dyslexia, a little bit of autism, definitely some sensory processing. And then even though this isn't neurodiversity, my uncle passed away with dementia. And therefore I'm very, very passionate about protecting young brains, older brains, everyone's brains.
Wow, that's an incredible story. I love to hear that both your husband and you have been diagnosed and you were kind of having those conversations. I think we're quite similar in my household. My husband was diagnosed with ADHD in adulthood. And I've got dyslexia, but I knew that from a young age. I was diagnosed when I was 7. But it's through sort of talking about some of my traits and now what we're seeing traits in my children. Like my eldest has been diagnosed with dyslexia and dyspraxia, but is what kind of prompted us to get my husband's diagnosis. Because like you say, you're kind of having those conversations and we'd be like, yeah, that's definitely you. Or we could see those patterns of behaviour and the fact that he's sort of on the go and all those sorts of things as to how, what led us to getting him diagnosed as well.
That's fascinating. So I was working with a dyslexia charity relatively recently, and it was suggested that a very high percentage of people with dyslexia also have ADHD.
Oh, really?
And there are very similar brain pathways, whereas not everybody with ADHD also has dyslexia. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I don't have the dyslexia. My spelling ain't perfect, but I don't have proper dyslexia as such. It wasn't a difficulty for me to read or write or spell at school. Yeah,
it's interesting that, isn't it? How you'll often have 2 coinciding neurodiverse what term would we call it?
It's an umbrella of crossovers. So they're called comorbidities. They work along together, coexist together. There are many ways of sort of describing it. I mean, a lot of people have put together sort of Venn diagrams as such of all the crossovers. But I think the most important thing is that we all have a unique brain.
Yeah.
And whether you see an educational psychologist to have diagnosis of a learning difficulty like dyslexia, or whether you see a psychiatrist and you get a diagnosis of maybe ADHD, autism, both together, or tic disorders, or whatever it might be, or you might see a neurologist. You know, there are so many different aspects to neurodiversity that, you know, at the end of the day, even with those diagnoses, it does not describe the whole you.
Yeah.
And for instance, you know, with ADHD, there are quite, you know, important criteria to get a diagnosis. You know, so impulsivity, you know, maybe hyperactivity or zoning out. You know, there are various different aspects to it. But what we find most parents come to us is for an aspect that is not assessed for ADHD, which is emotional dysregulation, meltdowns, finding it very difficult to coexist with this brain.
Yeah.
And so the underlying brain is utterly brilliant, but you're not seeing it because there's so much else going on.
Absolutely. So for children who are very selective with food, especially with sensory challenges, where should a parent begin?
Oh, you know, it's a really tricky one, but that's where I think a very high proportion of parents do come to see us because it's something that I had to crack for my children, and amongst my NatureDoc team, we've all had challenges, or most of us have had challenges with feeding our children at some point, whether it's highly selective eating, whether it's a sensory issue, whether it's managing allergies and food intolerances, or, you know, the restrictions from religious restrictions. You know, I mean, eating nowadays is really complex. And a lot of people just get confused by, you know, their social media feed.
Yeah.
Are you meant to be carnivore? Are you meant to be vegan? You know, what, you know, is plant-based milk good? Is it bad? You know, what do you do? So it is incredibly confusing and emotive and personal. But I think really, where do parents start? First of all, obviously, there's the things that we all know that we should be doing. And it's things like taking things slow, thinking, how could we change one small thing? So it could be, you know, that they like apple juice, and then you think, okay, maybe I can do a sort of apple-y smoothie. Maybe I can then do apple puree. Maybe then I could do, I don't know, an apple crumble, an apple-y biscuit, and then maybe eventually they might eat an actual apple. But there are up to 40 steps. So there's something called the SOS feeding therapies, which we can help with at NatureDoc, which literally is, we're seeing children with severe, this thing called ARFID, which is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, where often these children are only eating 2 foods, 5 foods. They actually have a fear or a complete inability to be able to put anything else in their mouth.
Wow.
And sometimes we see them where they will literally not even be able to come into the kitchen if there's a fruit bowl out. The smell of fruit will make them literally sort of, really kind of like feel headachy and sick and panicky.
That's the thing with food, isn't it? Is we do eat with all our senses. I definitely noticed that with one of my children in particular. The sight of things and the textures will really put him off. So it can be really difficult because I'll be like, but you like it in this format, but because it's changed, he's not interested. He literally likes it to look exactly the same. Like we have a bit of a running joke in my household that my son will eat a microwavable spaghetti bolognese from Marks and Spencer's. But if it's been in the freezer and it's come out, it changes the slight colour of the bolognese. Well, that's not acceptable to him. It's a different dish. He won't eat it. So everything has to literally look exactly the same for him to even try it.
It's incredibly hard when we're in that sort of situation. And I think that's where you need to lean into much more than putting, you know, square peg in round hole.
Yeah.
I think which so many people think, oh, and there's some statistics, something like 90% of parents give up the whole idea of feeding their child anything green by the age of 10. You know, because it's exhausting. And if you're trying to do that 3 times a day or whatever it is, every single day, and they won't touch it or smell it or even put it near their lips, not even be in the room with it, then that's incredibly hard. But that's where you need to lean into understanding this may be more than just what it looks like, what it smells like. It could be part of that person's neurology. So a lot of people who do have this highly restrictive eating are also autistic.
Right.
So there is a kind of black and whiteness to some people who live with autism who are able to literally say, that is right, that is wrong. And in their brains, they're unable to have that flexibility of mind to see that even that slight difference in that spaghetti bolognese is acceptable to them. Equally, if their neurological system is out of whack, so you're in a high fight or flight state, you've associated mealtimes with a very high stress environment. There may have been a choking incident. There may have been a situation where maybe a parent has lost their rag a little bit because, every parent at one point will go, oh my goodness, why can't you eat the blimming broccoli, So there are just all these fears that can come around eating, however calm you want to be.
I suppose there's a lot of emotional triggers for the parent feeding the child, isn't there? Because there's this want to provide a healthy, nutritious meal. And when it's constantly rejected, it can be really exhausting and exasperating as to know, how can I get some nutrition into my child? And I know from my own personal experience, you can feel like you're failing when you can't do that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's incredibly emotive. It's a natural instinct as a parent to want to nourish your child. That's what we do. It's the first thing a child does when they're born is to take some breast milk. So it's part of our whole wiring as being a parent. And at the end of the day, we have these fears. I had someone the other day, my son is, she was saying her son is, got this ARFID and he eats a lot of ultra-processed food. Will he get bowel cancer when he's 40? That was it. She said that about 10 times during the consultation. Wow. Yeah. So that's her biggest fear.
Yeah.
And even though actually her husband was exactly the same, and I think he's over 40 and he's doesn't have bowel cancer, but you know what I mean? Still, I can see that fear. So again, when you kind of get that in your mindset, or if you've had a poor relationship with food yourself, a lot of women especially, may have had, not always women, but quite a lot, have had some sort of disordered eating or an eating disorder when they're younger. And therefore, they know that hasn't served them terribly well. And therefore, they're passionate about their child feeding well and also just growing tall enough and strong enough and knowing to feed their brain. And also, I think instinctively, we know a well-fed child is a happy child.
Yeah.
They sleep better, focus better, their behaviour's better. But this is where we do need to lean into their neurology and understand that underlying nutrition. So if you can think about a child who has essentially been eating a diet that is not rich in things like iron, zinc, omega-3, B vitamins, magnesium, all these really, really vital nutrients that are so important for a child's development, but also their nervous system, is going to become depleted. They're then going to become much more dysregulated than they would have been. And that shuts off senses. It shuts off things like sense of smell, taste. It exacerbates that perceived understanding of texture.
That's interesting.
But also that fear response, So what we tend to do is we know how hard it is to change the diet, and we know how hard parent has tried for years to try and adapt their child to a new diet. To even add in one new food is a big hurrah. So we're thinking, okay, very often these children are very bright and they do know that they need the nutrition, but they have the fear and they can't. It's a bit like a child who wants to go to school but cannot step through that door, for whatever reason. They're fearful of going to school. So what we tend to do is to have a conversation with them and say, you've done some blood tests, or we've run some other tests. We often do urine tests or hair tests, which are slightly less invasive. Right. A lot of kids who are fearful of food will also be fearful of having a blood test, etc. But we'll say your blood test or your test has shown that you're low in iron. Now, here is a spray that you need to take every day, and this will help you feel so much better and they often love science. They say your numbers will go from 12 to 100. And when we get to 100, then you can stop.
Yeah.
And they go, okay. Or it might be a little capsule. If they're a little bit older, 7, 8, 9, that sort of thing, they often can. And again, they rather like that because they know it's not a food, but they know it's nutrition they need. And nutrition is more than just food and more than just supplements as well. And obviously it's not going to fill in all the gaps, but nutrition is also what you put on your skin, what you breathe.
Yeah.
So often you can reboot that neurological system by thinking, I'm going to have fresher air in the house. I'm going to do more time outside, less screens, less chemicals in my environment, because all of those can perturb the neurological system, nervous system too.
Yeah,
so
if you're the overall well-being of the child.
So sometimes you have to start with very kind of like non-food things. But the big sort of 3 that we use, which I think everyone wants to hear about, because everyone wants to be able to come away from a podcast really kind of empowered and think, I can do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So the main one that we start off with is zinc.
Right.
Zinc is a mighty mineral. It's the second most abundant mineral in your central nervous system. And it helps with things like immunity and so forth. But it also helps create, it's one of the components of gastric juices.
Okay.
So it makes you a bit hungrier.
Yeah.
But it also helps with sense of smell and taste.
Interesting.
And interestingly, if it's incredibly neurological and nervous system, as I said, so we have found in our clinic, this is not identified in research, but I've been doing this 30 years. We've seen 12,000 kids, something like that. So quite a lot, is that also within 2 to 3 months, if you get the zinc right, and if that's what they need, and I'm not saying it's always what they need, but if they do need that, very often the texture is less of a problem too.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so it's really, really exciting.
Yeah.
Now, the even better is you can get zinc drops, and just be completely transparent, we have an online shop called NatureDoc shop, where we have a whole host of different supplements, and we have a free service where people can email us or DM us on Instagram, and you can say, I've got, a 6-year-old who's got very highly selective eating. I want to try the zinc. Which one would you suggest?
Yeah.
And then we can find the right one that's going to suit them.
That's incredible.
A lot of the time there's zinc drops that are almost tasteless. I always say that almost tasteless because there's a slight metallicness to it, slight saltiness to it. But usually you can hide it in apple juice or a food or, a little bit of smoothie or something. Now, sometimes these kids are super highly selective and you have to really think out of the box. And that's where our clinical team is magic, at finding ways of getting the zinc in. But normally within, as I said, 2 months, 3 months, maybe 6 weeks, sometimes less, you get this extraordinary change.
Wow.
And so I get Instagram messages all the time.
Really?
There's a lot of our followers are saying, I'm just going to see what Lucinda's talking about, see if that works.
Yeah.
Is that possible? Will they accept it? And I get messages like, we've been doing this for 12 days and my ARFID kid is eating spinach and broccoli.
Gosh,
and they
incredible.
Go, oh my God, they're just their jaws on the floor. They're so excited.
Just from the zinc.
Yeah, it's just brilliant. So that is a really good first step.
Absolutely. And
a lot of people say, what about, could it disrupt other minerals in the body? At that sort of level, if you follow what says on the label up to 3 months, then it's pretty hard to go wrong. It's when people, there's the occasional study where someone's gone completely overboard and taken gazillions, and that's why it can go wrong. So generally follow the instructions on the label and you should be good.
Okay.
So that's the very first one.
Yep.
The second one, we've all heard about the gut microbiome.
Yes.
So the gut microbiome is this amazing ecosystem within our bellies of billions and billions of bacteria. Now, when a child, for whatever reason, maybe they've been on some antibiotics, maybe they were on antacids, for reflux when they were little, but maybe that gut microbiome hasn't quite formed in the right balance to be able to produce things called neurotransmitters. So they are the building blocks. So these bacteria in the gut are the building blocks for making serotonin, which makes you happy, helps you sleep, etc. It helps with things like GABA, and GABA helps you stay nice and cool and calm. acetylcholine, which helps you kind of with working memory and processing. So processing that whole food experience. There are all these aspects, and dopamine as well. So the gut bacteria also makes dopamine, which is the ADHD one. So if you think about it, if the gut's out, so they've been on lots of antibiotics for ear infections.
And that's quite common, isn't it, for neurodiverse children? I say that just because, again, speaking of my own experience, my son had relentless ear infections. We pretty much got one every month for about 18 months. Yeah. So constant antibiotics. As I've sort of explained to you, he's not great on different foods and things. So obviously getting the antibiotics into him every month was just the worst job. And then it got worse each month.
Of course.
Because obviously he became more and more resistant. And then we couldn't kind of shake the ear infections. We went through the route of getting grommets. The grommets didn't work. He still ended up with gluing. He ended up with a perforated eardrum. And that definitely had an impact on his gut health for sure. And I was a bit of a loss though, because you don't get any support through that journey as to how to then help with the gut. How to kind of fix what you've done with all the antibiotics and what else you can do to help.
Yeah, absolutely. So in France, if you get antibiotics, you're also given, a prescription for probiotics or live bacteria.
Yeah,
as well.
you don't get that in the UK, do you?
You don't. So you do need to seek out, get in touch with NatureDoc, as I said, and we can tell you which ones to take. I saw a child just yesterday. He had a ruptured appendix, and then he had a bowel obstruction. So he's been in hospital for 2 weeks now, and he's on 3 very strong antibiotics. So what we can do is also, if they're on long-term antibiotics, be able to look up and find out exactly which interactions they have with which supplements and so forth, and which ones are most beneficial.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of getting into the sort of nitty-gritty of it all. But essentially, if you've been on lots of antibiotics, that carpet bombs the gut microbiome. It takes away the beneficial bacteria, and it gives the chance for the more inflammatory bacteria to take over in the gut. And those can disrupt the pathways of these neurotransmitters, but also there are certain strains which are neurotoxic, which means toxic to the brain and the neurological system. So they can send the child into this spiral of that high fight or flight state, feeling quite rigid, shutting down that flexibility of brain, etc. It's not causing the neurodiversity, but it's definitely magnifying it. And so often parents will say, well, they were eating quite well as a little one, and then they started getting these ear infections, and now they just will only eat, waffles or nuggets or whatever it might be. And so I always say, when did this all start? And occasionally it is right from birth. They had struggles with latching on, and, it goes on and on and on. Or mum had antibiotics at birth, or the baby did. And it all started there. But there is so much research now about the gut microbiome, and the very, very similar messaging all the way across the board of these neuroinflammatory kind of bacteria getting stuck in the gut and really taking over and not giving the chance for the good guys to repopulate. And if you're having a pretty narrow diet that's not full of fruit and vegetables and fibers and all those amazing things that help to, kefirs and yogurts and all those things that help to kind of nourish that gut microbiome, then it's going to put things out of whack for a long time. So that again is where actually you do need to think about supplements just to switch. It's to get them out of that mode and think, suddenly there's more good guys and less of the bad guys. So it's all about a balance. And then, as I said, they start feeling hungrier, more open to trying foods. And then over time, then once the good diet comes in, then they probably don't need that support. So I definitely see these supplements as scaffolding. And that scaffolding could be for a month or two. It could be for 2 or 3 years. But it's very rarely for the very long term. And it's often actually because the parent's too fearful of taking it out because they don't want it to go backwards rather than actually needing it. I think. So these used to be called probiotics. We now have to call them live bacteria strains, friendly bacteria.
Why is that?
It's to do with, even though you can't have probiotics prescribed in the UK, as I said, they can be prescribed in France and other countries. So it's seen quasi as sort of quasi-medical now. So it's making a medical claim.
Yeah.
So therefore, we call it live bacteria, friendly bacteria. So just in case someone's Googling probiotics and can't find it, that's why.
Okay.
And again, that's why you might need a helping hand from NatureDoc to find the right one. And there are some strains which are really good for the loose bowel. There are others which are really good for the kind of harder, sort of more congested, constipated bowel. There are some which are better for, kind of that calmness. There are some which are better more for processing and working memory. So again, it's a bit complicated, but it doesn't need to be. But in Brain Brilliance, I drill it right down so actually people can navigate it themselves. So this is my book that came out a year ago, which is all about neurodiversity and food.
I love it. It's a brilliant book. There's so much information in there, isn't it? Especially for anybody, obviously, who feels a little bit stuck with their child's neurodiversity and exactly like you're saying, all these challenges and problems, which kind of all fit the puzzle together. It fascinates me how it's all a piece of the bigger picture. So it's really kind of understanding that and pulling it all together, isn't it, as to how to get the best for your child, really.
Absolutely. And then the third scenario, which is really interesting, this is really for the child that properly is on two foods and their bowel does not seem right at all. They're either going for a poo, once a week, or it comes out like great big, the size of an elephant's poo, or they're in a lot of gut pain, very, very bloated, undigested food, yellow poo, just something that just is not right. Then very often the gut is not finding it easy to digest and absorb those nutrients. So it's all kind of building up, sitting there and going, I'm undigested, I don't know what to go. So it's not going through to the bloodstream, it's not feeding the cells, it's not feeding the brain cells. So the body is starving, but the gut is full of this undigested food. So eventually it comes out, but it takes time. And that's why you get this sort of very, very large, bulky poos and etc. And they're often yellow and a bit sort of oily. They're just not right.
Yeah.
Or just incredibly smelly and, whatever. And that is where you might want to lean into something called digestive enzymes. And these basically, again, just help the gut to digest and absorb. So then suddenly more goodness is going through that gut lining into the system, feeding the system. And also then it's easier to go. And I think even if you have neurotypical kids who don't have the complications, I think we all know how happy and how well a child eats once they've done a poo.
So are there any certain foods or ingredients you see that regularly have a negative effect?
So I think a lot of people like to do pointy fingers at specific foods. And I think that we've all heard about this term ultra-processed foods.
Yeah.
Which is a great big, it's a whole kind of, it's some people's whole diet, I think with some toddlers, it's 75%, some teenagers, it could be 85%. It could be a really high percentage. And these are foods that are made by food manufacturers. And when you look at the label, there are lots of ingredients there that you would never be able to find in a domestic kitchen. They're flavourings, emulsifiers, preservatives, that sort of thing. And what is happening is those foods are made from very, very cheap ingredients. They're very refined, so they'll use incredibly refined flour, vegetable oils, etc., and make some sort of sticky mess. And then they'll say, I want to turn this into a cookie, or I want to turn it into a yogurt, or I want to turn it into a cake. And therefore they start adding all these chemicals to then adjust it to make it tasty and have the right texture and to have the right shelf life, etc., etc., etc. And also the price point. So, there's a whole load of different dynamics behind it. Now, the trouble is those foods might taste amazing. They might even feel really addictive, because they're also geared to tell the brain, eat more, 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 more. Because at the end of the day, if you can sell more food, more profits. Now, a lot of this has come from the consumer as well. So I think a lot of people blame food manufacturers, but actually a lot of it's feedback from consumers saying, I want less salt, I want less sugar, but I want, or whatever it might be, or I want, it to be crunchier.
Yeah.
So, there's a whole host of different dynamics going on. But essentially, these foods can suddenly become the whole diet or a very high proportion of the diet, but they're not containing those nutrients that are so vital for child development.
Yeah.
So just on the basics, where's the protein? Sometimes they do add protein, the protein bars and whatever, but that may be missing. Also healthy fats, things like omega-3, which is so vital for things like executive function and focus and concentration and general reading and writing and spelling, all these important things.
Yeah.
That's missing. I mean, it's just not in those foods. Or drinks. And then, the zinc I talked about earlier, that tends to be in nuts and dairy and shellfish and seafood and meat. Very rarely are you going to get an ultra-processed food that a child will eat that contains those ingredients.
Yeah.
Just won't. Iron, such a vital. And I was talking about zinc being the second most abundant mineral in your central nervous system. Well, iron's the most abundant.
Right.
So without enough iron, really the wheels can really fall off. And again, those tend to be in red meats and green veggies and black beans and, some apricots. And again, they're not those foods that I see on the lists of when the kids come to see us. They're just not. And therefore, these kids are often running low in iron, and that can really dysregulate them as well. So I think the big thing is that these kids are well fed in terms of calories. They're happy because that cake or those crisps tasted fantastic. Gave them that sensory feedback.
Yeah.
But within 45 minutes, their brain's going, oh, I've got nothing to fuel me.
Yeah.
Something missing here.
Yeah.
And that's where the behaviours kick in, the emotional dysregulation kicks in, the poor focus, inattention, and general sort of stroppiness.
Yeah. God, it fascinates me. It really does, just how many things that the brain does need to develop and grow and manage those behaviours, and how, there's so many foods that are marketed to our children and to us as parents to give our kids, and they are lacking in those vital ingredients that our children really need to be growing and developing to the optimal level, really.
Yes, absolutely. I always say there's no bad food.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of parents feel guilty about what their children are eating because they've got themselves in such a food rut, and I don't believe that they're bad foods at all, because there is a place for all of these deliciousness. I mean, when I was growing up, we had things like Angel Delight and Arctic Roll and all those sorts of things, and, I guess I'm okay. But I think, those foods have changed quite dramatically in terms of the ingredients that have gone in. So there are many more ultra-processed kind of components to those foods now, even if they look and taste about the same as we remember. But equally, it's the quantity that we're having. So all the experts say it's not about getting rid of ultra-processed foods entirely. It's trying to get it to 20% or below in your diet, which is essentially about 4 times a week.
Yeah.
Which actually, if your kid says, I love, I don't know, it could be Cheerios, it could be Wotsits, whatever it might be, Jaffa cakes, whatever they love. Actually, if they know that they could choose to have those 4 times a week, that's their absolute favourite. And the rest of the time they had mum and dad's home cooking, good quality food.
Yeah.
That's not quite so bad.
Yes.
As feeling that something's been banned.
Yes.
And again, there's so many people, I think we'll talk about sugar in a minute, but so many people say, I must make my child sugar-free. Yeah. And I would just want to, bust some myths on that.
Yeah. I mean, you're so right. That's what I was going to ask you next, actually, was what about sugar? There's so much guilt and confusion around sugar. And what's your take on it, especially when it comes to neurodiverse children?
So it is quite well established that many people that are also neurodiverse find it hard to regulate the blood sugars. So certainly us as a family, we're pretty scratchy if we don't eat the right food. It can be pretty hectic if we don't have enough protein, good healthy fats, good quality foods. If I don't eat nutrient-dense foods, I'm pretty wobbly. even, 30 years on.
Yeah.
So it's something I have to manage day to day. We all have to manage day to day, but equally does serve you well in the long term to get into those habits, as in, you're generally better, as well. But we all, as humans, love to have sugar. Breast milk is very sweet. So it's our first food as well. So we have to think, sugar cannot be the worst thing ever. You look, I'm very into food history, and, you look at these, tribes in Africa that still live very much in a sort of natural way, and they do eat honey, and they do have berries, not as much, but they do have some.
This is quite a natural ingredient when we look at it in fruits and things, isn't it?
Absolutely. So I think a lot of people get this really het up about the word sugar. I think the big problem is we're having far too much refined carbohydrate. So there's starches from the ultra-processed foods, whether it's the crisps or the biscuits or, those, kids' bars and things like that. There's a lot of refined sugar. Even whole grain cereals are refined, and then they add in a bit of whole grain. So there's a lot of refined going in. And those can really disrupt your blood sugar ups and downs. So it can set you up on a bit of a roller coaster.
It can be so confusing though, doesn't it? You saying cereal, I think that's one that always gets me, because breakfast, you want it to be quick. Cereal is kind of a good option that it's quick. And they market it that it's whole grain, that it's fortified with something like some B12. And you think that's a great option for my kid. There's a bit of vitamins, there's some whole grains, and it's quick. But that's not the case, is it? There's many things in there that aren't great for our children.
Well, when you puff up a grain, so you turn it into a Rice Krispie, or, a Cheerio, or even a cornflake, you're turning that bit of corn into that cornflake. That process suddenly makes it much more refined and much more disruptive on your blood sugars than it would have been in its natural state.
Yeah.
So these are all these processing things that they do within the food manufacturers that will make these things act more like highly sugary things on your body, even if they don't actually contain any known sugar.
Yeah.
So a lot of people know about these blood sugar monitors. Now, that's not something that a child would wear unless they're diabetic. But what's really interesting is before those were quite freely available, there was something created called the glycemic index.
Yeah.
And essentially it's how most people react to foods in terms of how quickly their blood sugar goes shooting up and then shooting down again. So it's that hyper and hangry feeling. And that's that sort of roller coaster. Whereas there are foods that when you eat, you'll have a much flatter, blunted sort of response. And that's where you feel fuller for longer. Your brain feels a bit more nourished, less empty, etc.
That's what we're aiming for, isn't it?
That's what you're aiming for. So, as I said, none of these are bad foods, but it's whether what you need to do is, if they're a high glycemic food, you need to balance them with some protein. Otherwise, to blunt that high and low.
And am I right in saying everyone responds quite differently to those things? So different foods will affect different people?
Well, that's where the blood glucose monitors come in.
Yeah.
But, as I said, it's not something that children will be doing.
Yeah.
So therefore, you have to slightly go with this is what happens to most people, and then observe them and see, how they are. And I'll explain that in a minute. So essentially, the glycemic index is 0 to just over 100, okay? 0 being fish, meat, eggs, those things that should completely and utterly not do anything to your blood sugar. That's why people have the ketogenic diet or whatever it is, and, they have no issues with their blood sugars. And then table sugar, so those cubes of white sugar that you think, I don't think I'm going to give my kid, is 65 out of 100, okay? Now, things like rice cakes, Rice Krispies are sort of in the 70s. So they're actually slightly worse than that white sugar in terms of the blood sugar spike. And then things like corn flakes and corn cakes are more in the 80s, 82, 83. Now, diabetics take glucose, that's 103, so you can see that's super high. And then, unfortunately, oat milk is 105.
Wow.
It contains maltose, which is much higher in terms of the blood sugar spike than glucose. So...
Because a lot of people drink oat milk nowadays, don't they? There's been so much about replacing cow's milk. And I think every time I'm in a line for a coffee, everyone is ordering oat milk.
Absolutely. So if you can imagine, you're thinking, I'm going to go healthy, I'm going to go low sugar. So I'm going to give my child some cornflakes with oat milk. for breakfast. That's going to literally, they're going to go so hyper and they're so hungry within probably 40 minutes. And they think, what went wrong? You know, that was meant to be a healthy breakfast. So what you would do is think, okay, they really like that breakfast. Could they have proper cow's milk? So at least there's some protein and healthy fat in there, you know, full fat, etc. And could I add something to that cornflakes, some protein to there? And it would be some ground up seeds or something like that. You know, sometimes kids will take that. Or can I serve them a dippy egg beforehand? Or, you know, even if it's a leftover sausage from the night before, just something, or some yogurt, or put some peanut butter on the toast. So suddenly to get that protein as well. So there's nothing wrong with having the cereal, but on its own might not serve them so well. And the way that you will understand if it's serving them well or not is, first of all, their behaviour. So are they completely crazy after breakfast and really difficult to get in the car, completely hyperactive on the way to school? And then you get reports from the teachers that even in the first lesson, you know, they're hiding under their, you know, they're being disruptive, they're being tricky, or they're zoned out. So that's one example. And the other one is if they're at home, are they scratching around? Are they going to the fridge? Are they going to the snack drawer within 2 hours of having breakfast?
Right.
And that's not just because they haven't had enough breakfast. It's because basically their body's saying, I need something more. I haven't had enough protein. So essentially, if that's their pattern, then what you want to do is think, I need to give more protein at breakfast somehow. And, you know, some of the older kids, we do need to put protein powders in a smoothie because they're off on their school bus at 7 in the morning, and, you know, they're not that hungry when they wake up. But others, great. You know, we do, in Brain Brilliance, there's a porridge with a cracked egg in it. And that is magic because even the fussy kids don't even know the egg's in there. So just weigh somehow, maybe, as I said, it could just be a little yogurt. It could be just something just to give them a little bit of protein before they head off for school.
And just, you touched on the oat milk there. What about a child that can't have cow's milk, if they've got a cow's milk allergy, say? What milks would you be giving them? Because obviously when they turn to one, they'll often change from a formula to a different type of milk. What would you recommend if not oat milk?
It's a really tricky question. And if I knew the answer, I'd be a multi-billionaire. So one day it will be discovered, this option. So there are an awful lot of kids who are, you know, diagnosed with a dairy intolerance, dairy allergy, very early doors, because obviously milk is the first thing that they consume. So it's quite obvious it's that. And so parents are very fearful of reintroducing or doing the milk ladder, you know, once they get to 12 months, etc. And some fail that milk ladder, you know, they really can't introduce it. The trouble is no one yet. There are a couple of quite good now formula toddler brands that are okay. You know, they've got some good stuff, but they don't taste the same, I'm just going to say. But generally, the ones that you buy in the shops, you know, the oat milks, the almond milks, the cashew milks, the hemp milks, the coconut milks, they're not for children. They're there as white water to make someone feel like they've got a nice creamy coffee or a delicious frappe or whatever it might be, rather than to be nutritious. And they tick boxes to help them sell, like added calcium. It's usually calcium carbonate, which is really difficult for the body to absorb and digest. They use the vegan form of B12 and D, which again, the body will not absorb as efficiently as the more bioavailable types. And as I said, a lot of them are, you know, they use rice or something like that to make them sweet. And again, that can be quite refined. So there is no perfect solution. And what I suggest that you get them into a habit, if possible, of thinking about foods that don't naturally have dairy in them. Does that make sense? So rather than go, just because I have cereal for breakfast, my child needs cereal for breakfast, so they must have this oat milk. You're thinking, so they can't do dairy. Can I do scrambled eggs? Can I do baked beans? Can I do, even halloumi? Not halloumi because that's dairy, but, you know, lots of different kind of options, even like hummus on toast or something like that. Just think out of the box and think of a different breakfast that's more nutritious and is going to actually naturally contain some of those good nutrients rather than to try and mimic exactly the same
that's
as what the rest of the kids have.
Yeah, okay.
So it is white water. You know, those milks are sometimes 2% almond, 8%, 9%, you know, very rarely are they more than that. So if you think about that, how much is in that litre of, and all the rest is water and, I don't know, vegetable oil or whatever. So just think of it as, I always say, use those plant-based milks just to make them feel more normal, to be able to, I know, make a white sauce or to thin out that porridge. Yeah, exactly. But not to be a core part of their nutrition. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Okay. So are there some key foods and nutrients in that can really support focus and mood?
Ooh, great question. Okie dokes. So in terms of focus, probably the most researched food group are these omega-3 fatty acids.
Yeah.
It's come from oily fish.
Right.
So we're thinking sardines, salmon, mackerel, anchovies, but also seafood, things like prawns, crab, little shrimps, etc. These foods, basically, this omega-3 contains something called DHA. And DHA helps the brain to develop. It helps the link between your eyes and your brain to connect and those nerves to work so that you can read properly, see properly. I find, not you, I know you said you're dyslexic, but a lot of the kids that maybe have dyslexia plus, because there's often, as I said, a complexity, they often don't look at you straight in the face. They often have a slightly wandering eye, for instance, and so omega-3 is kind of indicated for that. It's indicated if you've got very dry skin, very dry hair, especially the bumpy skin at the top of the arms, that sort of chicken skin.
Yeah.
That's quite a good indicator that they might need more.
Okay.
And the big research, I mean, they've looked at, kids with ADHD, dyslexia, autism in different settings. They've also looked at adults. They've also looked at adults who are offenders, so prisoners and things like that, and really found great strides in mood, regulation, focus, etc., just with either eating more oily fish or supplementing. A lot of kids, especially if they're fussy, just don't like the idea of fish.
I was just going to say that. Is it realistic to get some of those foods you just suggested, like mackerel and certain types of fish, into a child when they're perhaps when they're a fussy eater? Is it okay to supplement?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, if your kid loves fish, and some do, great, just go for it. And that could literally be mackerel pate on some toast at breakfast, or, little bits of, smoked trout or whatever it is, or smoked salmon, or I don't know, it literally could be little bits at lunch, little bits as snacks, you can sort of weave it in.
Yeah.
You can do kedgeree and fish cakes and all sorts. Great. However, the reality is, unless fish is incredibly fresh, it tastes too fishy.
Yeah.
And kids don't like that sort of strong taste.
Yeah.
And therefore, they say they don't like fish. Many kids now are allergic to fish or certain types of fish like cod or salmon. So, it is quite complicated. A lot of families are now plant-based. So actually that's not part of their diet anyway. So this is where leaning into supplements can really, really help. You can get little jelly omega-3s, you can get chewables, you can get capsules, you can get liquids. Some have lemon flavour, some have strawberry flavour, some have orange flavour. You know what I mean? So there's a whole range. The really good quality ones tend to screen out the fishy taste. So they are a lighter fishy taste, again, with the strawberry overlay or the orange overlay or whatever it might be. So they are more acceptable, and they do mix in quite well into smoothies and yogurts and things like that. So, it is possible to get it in. And so the big thing is there are these different types of omega-3. So the DHA is the one for brain development. So it's essential for if you're thinking, on a fertility journey, if you're pregnant, breastfeeding. So for mummy, and that helps with things like postnatal depression, that mummy brain fog, but also if you're breastfeeding or you're pregnant, that's going to then filter through to your child too. So it's really important for their brain, even before they're born or when they're just born. Up until about the age of 6. And that DHA and other omega-3 is vital for maturing your prefrontal and frontal cortex, which helps with focus, concentration, executive function, which is organising, planning. Because again, a lot of ADHD is kind of just scattiness, and, unfocused, procrastination, etc. So it's important. And also that maturity of the brain. So it's thinking, so many of the kids that we see, they're 9, 10 years old, but they're acting more like a 6 or 7-year-old. And that's what can affect their social sort of skills, is because they're not as mature or perceived as mature as their peers.
Yeah.
So again, omega-3 can help with catch up with that. It can help with things like catching up with your nervous system responses. So things like bedwetting. So often kids, especially neurodivergent kids, find it quite hard to be dry through the night. And so one of the signs they might need some more omega-3 is that bedwetting. And that we found so often. So there was a study done where they gave they were boys, I think, they're bedwetters aged 7 to 13.
Yeah.
And they gave them omega-3 and vitamin D for 8 weeks. And by the end, most were dry.
Really? That's fascinating.
Yeah.
My gosh.
So it's all about that maturity. So it's that sort of development, growing up kind of idea.
Yeah.
And then once they get to about 6 or 7, unless they're super behind with their skills, they then need more this EPA form, and the EPA will help with inflammation. And inflammation can be seen as aches and pains. It can be seen as bad eczema. It can be seen as bad asthma. But equally, it's where a child might be really dysregulated or raging or violent or just like very unsettled. And sometimes, that is basically a calling to say, I'm very inflamed and I need help. So that can help with that too.
Okay.
But what's interesting is a lot of people think, can I go for plant-based forms of omega-3? And yes, there is this ALA form, which is omega-3 in things like walnuts, flax seeds, chia seeds, and hemp seeds. However, only a maximum of 10% gets converted into that DHA, which is the really vital one for that development. And if you're a boy, you're a baby, if you've got some food, if you've got some nutrient deficiencies, that could be as little as 1%.
Gosh.
So as a plant-based family, you'd have to be really on it.
Yeah.
And they'd have to love their walnuts and flax seeds and whatever to be able to get enough in. So if a family is plant-based and listening to this, please do supplement with a marine algae-based omega-3. And that is because the marine algae is the food the fish eat, which gives them the omega-3. So it is very good quality, and it is plant-based, and it is really, really good. So you can do that. If people are eating, if they're not vegan or vegetarian, but their child will not eat fish, you can also just step up the quality, if you can afford this, the quality of certain foods. So if the milk is whole milk, so the blue top milk, and it is organic, or those cows have eaten grass outside, then there will be more omega-3 in that.
Right.
And equally the meat from those animals, again, because of the grass-fed, it's the grass-fed bit, will again have more omega-3 in it.
Okay.
There are some omega-3 eggs where the chickens have eaten flax seeds, so that's quite good. So there are different other ways in. So it's all about thinking, I don't think I can change their diet dramatically, but could I go to the butcher to get our meat? Could I go to, the farm shop and get the better quality local milk?
Yeah.
Rather
all
than
those little things can make a big difference. I love that. So Lucinda, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you today. Do you have any final words of advice before we end the podcast today?
You're all doing an incredible job. It's very hard navigating all of this. Your children are beautiful and wonderful. They have incredible, brilliant brains. And I just hope that some of these little nutrition tips will make a massive difference to the way they function in the world and you cope with parenting them, because there can be ups and downs. And, we're here at NatureDoc for you if you do have a big wobble.
Lovely. Thank you so much. I know myself personally, I have taken so much from this chat, and you've put it in great ways to understand that we can just make these little changes if we feel that there's a lot to do, so it's not too overwhelming. And I really love that. So I definitely feel the listeners today will really benefit from listening to this podcast. So thank you, Lucinda.
Thank you, Charis. You're
Lovely.
amazing.